One World Under One Sky. We bring you this special program from Nairobi, focusing on the 6th UN Environment Assembly. This is a co-production between CGTN and TV47. I'm Pandong with CGTN.
And I'm George Maringa with TV47. And as thousands of delegates converge in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, for the 6th session of the United Nations Environment Assembly, we bring you this conversation. Joining me on set are our guests from the immediate, rather extreme right is Richard Munang, Head of Global Environment Monitoring Systems. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining us. In the middle is Fred Duby, former Senior Counselor of the United Nations Secretariat and Expert Advisor for the international work of China, biodiversity conservation and green development. Thank you for joining us, Fred. And to my immediate right is Professor Liu Peiming, Executive Vice President of Tongji University. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us in the program.
And gentlemen, let's start with the theme of this year's UNEA gathering, dealing with a triple planetary crisis, namely climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution. Gentlemen, how pressing is the situation right now? Let me start with you, Dr. Munang.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Actually, the world is under the weight of environmental crisis, which we've already articulated, biodiversity loss, and pollution and waste and climate change. And as a result of this, we are seeing the challenges manifested every day, whether it is drought and flood, or whether it is each and every day, as we speak today, 2,000 trucks of garbage empty into our oceans, into our rivers, into our water bodies. And with all these challenges, for the past 40 years, 69% of our biodiversity and wildlife has actually been lost. And with these challenges, the world is coming together to be able to put in place not just policies, but pave the way forward in such a way that we can be able to advance not only nature actions and biodiversity solutions, but also drive a transformational pathway in which we can reduce pollution and enhance our transformational climate solutions.
Mr. Duty, what's your take?
Yeah, I can only agree. What I see is that the impact of these challenges is felt unequally around the world. It is felt very little by the rich people because they have able to build buffers to be able to for them the cost of food, whether a pound of rice costs $1 or $100, doesn't make that much difference. It doesn't really affect the budget. If the temperature is not good, you have an air conditioner. If the temperature is cold, you have a heater. You can really change the environment to suit you. And yet we have more than 6 billion people in the world who do not have that opportunity, who are tied to nature in a very, very symbiotic way, in a very profound way, and in fact, in a very glorious way. And I think these are the people that are most suffering. However, in the future, and the future may be only a few weeks away, we can see that these problems are felt also by other parts of society. Climate change has destroyed really a lot of what used to be the nice vacation warm spots in the US. Even Finland, where I live, we're now in my little town where normally -20 is cold, we were seeing more than -30. So there's changes that are taking, and they're taking place very quickly, and we have no opportunity to catch up. Culturally, economically, physically, we cannot catch up. So that is really, I'm supporting what you're saying 100%. Thank you.
Professor Liu.
Climate change is felt very obviously by everybody. Just speaking of this year, we have extreme heat and somewhere, and we have extreme coldness in some other places. So climate change is really in place. And pollution is almost, felt by everybody. So you see especially the white pollution, which takes longer time to be digested. So I think we are really, pressed by all these environmental and climate change issues and problems. Everybody should realize the importance or the urging us to take some actions to deal with these problems.
Richard, it is without doubt that all of you have agreed there is a problem. And given the enormity of these challenges that the world is currently facing, why are environment assemblies or meetings like UNEA 6 important?
Well, the UN Environment Assembly is the environment parliament of the world, bringing over 193 member states to be able to debate on the issues, as you've already heard, on climate change, on pollution and waste, on biodiversity laws. And it is only through collective action that these global issues can actually be solved. And so the United Nations Environment Assembly 6, as is happening under the theme effective, inclusive and sustainable solutions to tackle this triple planetary crisis couldn't have been more timely. And in this time around, we are speaking, and you've heard 7 million people across the entire world are dying as a result of air pollution. That's not just a statistic. As we're speaking today, that is killing more people 3 times more than accidents in the entire world. If you do that within the African continent, 700,000 Africans die because of indoor pollution. That is just on pollution. When it comes to climate change, the UNEP emissions gap report that was released last year in November shows that the world is heading towards 2.9 degrees. That's above the 1.5 that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has actually stated. If we were to go above that, we'll face cataclysmic effects. And we're already seeing sea level rise already. Putting these all together, member states coming together now to put in place resolutions that can help advance transformational action becomes very, very important. And that is the essence of why UNEA is here today. As the African proverb tells us, when the drum beat changes, so must the dance. So now the dance have to change, and that changing dancing steps have to be on solutions so that at least we don't continue down this pathway of challenges of pollution, challenges of climate change, and continuous destruction of our nature.
Absolutely. Professor Liu, what's your take on this?
I think such kind of international platforms are of vital importance to tackling the climate issues. First of all, this kind of assembly provides a platform for people from various countries to voice their concerns about the environmental pressures, especially those underdeveloped and the underprivileged groups of people. Their voices should be heard. Secondly, this provides a platform for people from different countries to share their expertise on dealing with environmental problems. Like for example, the Chinese government has been making great efforts to transform their energy consumption forms, right? And our expertise can be shared, especially for those developing countries, so that they can learn from the Chinese practices and to try to select their own path of energy transition. And I think these are very, very important international platforms.
Mr. Dudi, being specific on the loss of biodiversity, there have been quite some multilateral agreements dealing with that. Let's focus on the recent and the significant one, that is the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework reached in 2022. Now, almost 2 years have passed. What do you make of the actions that have taken place under this framework?
Thank you. But before we're doing that, I'd like to just remind us all of the goals of the Biodiversity Convention and the Global Biodiversity Framework. The first goal is the focus on ecosystems and the species health of the species. One of the critical things there is to halt human-induced species elimination. The second is sustainable use of biodiversity. And we all use biodiversity. That we cannot get away from. We use biodiversity. Every moment that we're sitting in this chair, we are using biodiversity. It has to be sustainable. The third is equitable sharing of benefits. And that's one of the things that our world is really not good at. We tend to find people who would like to share maybe 99 for me and 1 for you. That sounds like fair. Okay, so the equitable sharing of benefits is a very critical thing. And the fourth goal was to close the biodiversity funding gap, which is around $7 billion a year. So these are the goals that were set. And I think when we look at the actions, we look at the targets, we have to go back and think how these fit into the goals. UNEA is very important because it first of all brings the 3 crises together. Secondly, it provides the political oomph, the political power for governments to start implementing solutions. And it takes it away from nice wishful thinking, beautiful ideas that are talked about in the church on Sunday, into something that is hard, real, and has to have true, effective impact. So I think that's the importance of why we're here today. Thank you.
Richard, let's look at matters plastic pollution, and we are in the final stages of negotiations on a global instrument on plastic solution, a key outcome of UNEA 5. Now, how important is this agreement, and 2, what is UNEA 6's plan on this front?
Yeah, thanks again for that, which actually showcases that the UN Environment Assembly works, that global multilateralism works, because it was at UNEA 5.2 that the resolution to develop a plastic treaty actually happened. And today, it means that the challenges of climate change, of pollution, of biodiversity can be fostered. And it was then UNEA 5.2 that gave birth to that. And actually, as we're speaking today, it resulted to what is called the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, INC, which then saw negotiations on how the legal agreement on plastics can actually come into force, but not only focusing on reducing plastics, but on driving what is called circularity, so that plastics are not just thrown away, but they are recycled to replace and reduce the production of plastic. And that is called the value chain approach, to look at how do we reduce plastic from the environment, but at the same time, also help reduce emissions, also help ensure that they're not ending up in our oceans. Like I started off by saying, every 24 hours, 2,000 trucks of garbage, of plastic garbage, are ending up in our oceans. And as we're speaking today, we've had the third INC, which culminated in Nairobi here, bringing over 193 member states to continuously negotiate that legal instrument that will come into force by end of year. In April, in Canada, there will be the 4th. And in South Korea, by November, we will have the culmination of that legal agreement, which then means that by getting to 2025, the international community will have for the first time a legal agreement that will put risk with opportunities, that will put challenges with opportunities, and create the business environment that will not only see environmental challenges as challenges, but as disguised economic opportunities. And that is where we are today. And the last aspect to put on that is that UNEA 6 actually is focusing on resolutions that can ensure our clean air. How do we collaborate to then ensure that we reduce the air pollution that is killing 7 million citizens globally? How do we ensure that the water we drink, the quality of that water is not compromised? How do we ensure that now moving towards a low carbon pathway, the critical minerals that are needed for electric vehicles and mobility can actually be mined in a way that it's not working against nature, but it's working with nature. And that is what is currently being discussed at UNEA 6. And so paving the way to ensure that at least we can then be able, as we have the plastic legally binding agreement, we are also moving forward in ensuring that nature-based solutions are driving the pathway, clean air, clean oceans are actually in place.
Professor Lui, earlier you mentioned the importance of energy transition. So we have to talk about this landmark deal reached at last year's COP28, calling the world to transition away from fossil fuels. But the big question is how? Have you seen a clear action plan or implementation plan right now? If a fossil fuel is going away, then what are the other options available in the global picture?
Speaking of the technical pathways for the energy transitions, actually, many countries have developed their own solutions. Currently, for example, in the field of automobile industry, now we are developing or we are producing more and more electric cars. Electric cars are powered by batteries, but we are also working on fuel cell vehicles, right? And which uses hydrogen as the kind of energy source. And if we are really using hydrogen as the fuel source, now the net carbon emission would be zero. Now, of course, there are other issues in connection with this. This is one of the things. And also, we are using new forms of energy, like in solar energy. Solar energy is not a new phenomenon, but how to reduce the carbon emission during the production of the solar panels. That would be a technical issue for us. So if we can take good use of the solar energy, now actually the consumption of fossil fuels can be greatly reduced. And also we use other means of new energy, like for example biomass, like for example the wind energy. So all these are we say very good and feasible ways to reduce the use or the consumption of fossil fuels. Now, I mean, after decades of efforts, especially by the United Nations, now, like in the means of assemblies like the UNI6 and the previous ones, there are consensus achieved among the international community, and more countries are joining in to reduce to take actions to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels. That's a good trend, and we are very confident of the future.
Talking of energy sources, Fred, many of the developing countries are still using oil and gas, in their day-to-day activities, while part of the developed world wants to abolish fossil fuels and go the green way, and also use renewable energy. Is the deal too unfair, especially for the developing countries, noting or rather comparing or if you juxtapose the levels of development between the global north and the global south?
Can I twist your question around a little bit, because it's a very, very critical one. Let me start. When you set objectives, you set a framework for conflict. And the only example I can give you is my household, that my wife has objectives, my kids have objectives, my grandkids have objectives, and we have conflict because they don't particularly blend together. And there's two kinds of conflicts. One where the objectives are legitimate, but they're different. And the other, which happens more often, the objectives are not legitimate. They're really illegal, immoral, incorrect. And so that is the situation that we have to look at. How do we approach this? And I think another thing that we have to look is that there are two sides to most coins. I guess there may be. I don't know. I've never seen a three-sided coin, but there could be. And that is when we do things that, for instance, we want to electrify the world. To electrify the world, we have to produce a lot more copper. Copper production is one of the most terrible biodiversity and environmental threats that we have, especially if you live in a country like Chile, or you live in a world that has a Chile that is producing a lot of garbage. So this is one of the things that we have to take into account, the two sides of the coin. And you're bringing up an interesting one, and that is, how could I say, okay, well, instead of water, I will drink champagne? And you can say it, but you can't do it. So your solutions that will not be possible because of the environment that you're in. And that is not only in terms of funds, but in terms of education, in terms of population density, many, many different things. And I think the point that you're bringing up is a very critical one, that we have to start thinking in terms of a world of 8 billion people. Where I come from, we have a goal, and it's called 8B99, and the goal is all 8 billion people should live happily, healthily to 99 years of age. That's our vision, our goal that we can do. And I think if we take this and look at the impact of environment, those are barriers that we have to overcome. So one of the things is we cannot say to the developing countries, you have to come up with a new solution. Because that new solution is not for you, it's for us, it's for the whole world.
Yeah.
And I'll later on, I'll give you some examples of things that we're trying to do that will get all sides, all parties involved, really involved, put skin in the problem and in the solution. Okay, so thank you. It's a great question. It's one that we have to ponder, but we have to look at it, not looking at the past, but looking at how we could approach this in a completely different way.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
Nilikuwa na Nissan kama 10 na pia nilikuwa nimenunua minibus. Minibus niko niwa.
Kushinda unaangalia simu ya mzee, soma Biblia ama ingia kwa washroom ujisuke mpaka nimetoa hivi.
I don't know whether any of my children would want to get into the political field. Sijajua bado.
Kila Alhamisi saa 1:30 kuendelea.
Join us on a journey through the concrete jungles and rising skylines, where every beam, every nail tells a story of progress and vision.
In every aspect of life, you have to look at several dynamics.
From groundbreaking.
Nowadays with the tech, you can check on different websites or you check online and you can see some inspiration. So at least that one would be a direction already. I'll know like what kind of style you're going for.
To finishing touches, witness the dedication of the hard-working teams who bring these ambitious dreams to reality. The Realtor, Tuesdays at 6:30 p.m.
Na safari hii katika Mfahamu Kiongozi tutakuletea viongozi aina mbalimbali.
Nilikuwa na Nissan kama 10 na pia nilikuwa nimenunua minibus. Minibus niko niwa.
Kushinda unaangalia simu ya mzee, soma Biblia ama ingia kwa washroom ujisuke mpaka nimetoa hivi.
I don't know whether any of my children would want to get into the political field. Sijajua bado.
Kila Alhamisi saa 1:30 kuendelea.
Join us on a journey through the concrete jungles and rising skylines, where every beam, every nail tells a story of progress and vision.
In every aspect of life, you know, you have to look at several dynamics.
From groundbreaking
Well, Mr. Duty, your remarks lead us to another crucial issue in the big picture in dealing with environmental challenges, that is just transition. Professor Liu, what do you make of the current gap between developed and developing countries? And are the existing mechanisms, international institutions, enough to deal with this gap?
I cannot comment whether it is enough. But without this would be dangerous. It would be catastrophic. Now, we need these kind of setups because, in a sense, the less developed countries are in a underprivileged position to have availability to resources, to technology, and to the level of the public education. So, which these are very important for countries to solve environmental problems. So I always say that we must have such kind of international mechanism to help ensure, as it's just mentioned. Now, this is one world. No one can be exempted from his or her duties or responsibilities to can be concerned about others. The developed countries should take greater responsibility, in my view, because to a large extent, the climate issues or climate, dangers have much to do with them, and the underdeveloped countries need their help to help them to build up their capacity to transcend the kind of step-by-step kind of development, so that they can jump over to catch up with the developed countries.
I like to, I deal mainly in anecdotes. And one of the stories, a friend of mine was the president of Novartis, the giant Swiss pharmaceutical company.
Yes.
And one day he called his board together and he said, I would like to build a state-of-the-art laboratory in Africa. And I think it was Nigeria, but I'm not sure. And 2 years later, his team came back and said, well, Mr. President, we've got the thing. Let's all go. We get into our corporate jet and we fly down to see it. And he walked in and he said, close it. I don't want to see this. Because what they had done is they had duplicated a Swiss state-of-the-art laboratory. Yeah. He said, I want an African state-of-the-art. I want to get the information, the ideas, the objectives, the goals from the African scientists. I don't want to make a clone.
Yeah.
And I think this is so important. And this is, we are coming from and I come from a colony called Canada. And Canada was a colony, and really a colony that was abused by the colonial powers and is now being abused by other colonial powers who are not doing it so much with soldiers, although they would like to. But we have to get away from this mentality that we have the good guys who have all the ideas, the paternalistic side. And unfortunately, this is all men. This is one of the few programs I've been on that's all men. So we have to get away from that and start ensuring that everybody is participating and that we're able to capture the valuable ideas. And I don't think that a guy, and I spent 30 years of my life in the automotive industry, I don't think any of the people there, including my great friend, the chairman, who was one of the great open-minded thinkers of the world, had thought, gee, Africa might have some better ways to help people move.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that type of, in a way, humility, but in the other sense, perfect logic is what we're missing.
Absolutely. Richard, coming back to UNEA 6, this year's assembly will see and spotlight the work of multilateral environmental agreements. Why are they important to addressing environmental issues?
Very, very important. You talk about the Kunming-Montreal biodiversity framework, which in 2022, yes, December was adopted. Before that, in December 2015, the Paris Climate Change Agreement came into force. And before that, we have the Montreal Protocol, and we have the Convention on Biological Diversity 40 years after its adoption. So there is no absence of multilateral environmental agreements. And what the panelists have all alluded to here is the aspect of silos. Because we will not be able to implement and drive climate action while we are not working at the same time to address pollution and to address biodiversity loss. And therefore, the UN Environment Assembly discussion now is how do we create synergies and integrated approaches towards driving transformational development. And a practical example here is wastewater. Over 50% of wastewater globally gets into our river bodies, into our seas, into our oceans. And it's not just polluting and causing eutrophication and killing our aquatic life, but wastewater also emit what is called methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas that is 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide, which then means that if we can be able to address wastewater, we will indirectly be addressing climate change. We will be addressing biodiversity loss, which when the wastewater gets into our river bodies, it kills aquatic life, our fish. It kills these aquatic life that is actually dependent on by millions. But if we are able to apply solutions in turning this wastewater into an opportunity, into biogas that can be able to replace the unclean cooking that is actually killing millions of people across the world, and especially in the African continent, where we have 900,000 Africans who are depending on unclean cooking, then we'll be addressing a problem of air pollution. We're addressing a problem of water pollution. And that wastewater, again, can actually be converted to biofertilizer that will replace the chemicalized fertilizer that is disrupting, not just our soil, but leaching to impact our aquatic life. And this will create opportunities for the young people, because we're speaking at a time in which over 30% of the entire world, between 30 to 50% of the entire world's population is under the age of 30. In the African continent, over 70% of the entire population is under the age of 25 years. It then means that the discussion on youth unemployment should actually become a discussion on youth solutions and opportunities within addressing environmental solutions in a synergistic way, not in a silo approach way. And therefore, the multilateral environmental agreement implementing the Kunming-Montreal biodiversity framework will address climate change. It will address pollution. Implementing climate action should address biodiversity loss and should address pollution. And so that synergistic approach, leveraging multilateral environmental agreements that I've already mentioned, is actually the best way to move forward. Because let's not forget, over 50% of the entire global GDP is derived from nature. But yet, in December last year, the United Nations Environment Program released a report which was titled Finance for Nature, that showed that $7 trillion is actually invested in approaches that work against nature, not with nature, and only $200 million are invested in what is called nature positive solutions. That means there's no absence of money, but the money is being used wrongly. And therefore, if we can use the money the right way in driving solutions that will work with nature, not against nature, in driving solutions that can then be able to reduce pollution, that will at the same time reduce the changing climate that we see today. And just the last aspect on just transition, which I think the panelists articulated that aspect very excellently. It is about equity. It is about justice. When you look at the global south today, that is vulnerable to the changing climate and contributing the least. For example, Africa, that contributes just between 3 to 4%. Transitioning the continent will be about a mother in a community, in a village, who produces her food, but it gets spoiled because she lacks a solar cool storage or a solar dryer to then be able to add value to it. And therefore, just transition should be leveraging clean energy solutions to power transformational solutions that respond to the informal sector and those at the bottom of the pyramid. That is an aspect that will help reduce emissions which come from post-harvest losses, because food waste results and contribute to emissions. That will mean that there will be less focus on opening up more land that destroy our forests, our biodiversity. And that is the synergistic thinking that will help move us forward through the lens of just transition, but leveraging on multilateral environmental agreements.
Well, Mr. Dudu, you've been emphasizing an equal picture for all 8 billion people on this planet. This brings us to the China proposal of building a community of a shared future for mankind. Do you think it's conducive to the building up of true multilateralism in current world efforts to deal with environmental challenges?
Yes, I do. That's a quick answer. One of the problems with multilateral, because there are many, many good sides, but they can often not include all the people that should be included, all the sides that should be included. So you may have a dominant side that says, okay, we'll all do this together my way. And they may not make it very loud my way, but that's what they're fighting for. And the solution then is really a unilateral solution with a multilateral embellishment. And so that's a very, very critical thing that we have to think. We have to find a way to walk together. Now, one of the problems that you brought up, and that is transition. And I read some months ago the story of an African tribes, and these are thousands of years of people that moved north. And they populated what is today Northern Europe. And then came the Ice Age. But it came very gradually, and they moved back to Africa. And they were able to handle this. But we're talking in terms of maybe 1 million years. We have changes that are cataclysmic that happen. Well, let's take the latest example that we're all aware of, AI. 3 years ago, only a bunch of eggheads knew about AI, and probably the people that worked with the professor. But today, it's on top of us. And we don't know how to adapt to it. We have not the basis. So one of our great problems, our great challenges, is in education, to help people understand that stability. When I went to university, the idea is you would go to university, you would get your degree, you would get a job, you would stay in that job until you retired. And most of my friends did that. And they retired when they were 70 years old and died when they were 75. But that stability was guaranteed. Today, nobody even thinks of stability. Nobody will ask, I'm taking this job now, will you let me stay in the company for 50 years? And if the company is honest, we don't know if we'll be alive for 50 hours. So we have to find ways, and this really is where we have to walk together, where all the cultures, all the deep cultures that we have to come together to find approaches that will help us cope with rapid transition. And if we don't do that, I think we're lost. And that is part of this conference. Part of I spent a lot of effort in the CBD, going to all of the meetings, including in Montreal. Were you in Montreal?
No, I was not there, but I was following that.
Okay, and I was in Montreal, and it was so wonderful to see how people were walking together. And I think this plea from China to let's walk together towards a joint future, and that joint future will have to have some form of equality, of equity.
Professor, I could see you nodding. In a report to UNAS 6, Ms. Inga Anderson used the term highly fragmented to describe the current status of multilateral efforts to deal with environmental issues. What are some of the challenges to multilateralism?
Multilateralism is something we are, searching for. But today's world is somehow moving toward the opposite. You know, it's there are very strong, you know, motivation from the major powers of the globe,
Yes.
to move toward unilateralism, not multilateralism. Now, this is a very, you know, I would say, disturbing situation for us. I'm very much concerned about that. Now, we hope that on such, you know, international mechanism like the UNES 6, like, things like that, we need to try to reach or to talk people toward a consensus on multilateralism, because one world means everybody lives in connection with the other. There is no way for us to be isolated from the other people, from the other part of the world. If we want to protect our common sky, we need to promote or protect the multilateralism, which is a very important mechanism for the solution of the environmental issues.
What about the Global South, gentlemen? How can the Global South work together more?
They affect each and every one. And to each of the countries and parts of the world that these challenges are actually impacting, they do have solutions. But sometimes the solutions are never juxtaposed. The norm are not the exception. And because of this, innovative approaches of financing, like M-Pesa in Kenya, yeah, where a mother in a community will be able to access financing just through the use of a mobile phone. We have now the transformational solutions that are happening in other parts of the world. For example, China is moving with electric vehicles and electric mobility. In the African continent, that is a least emitter, they do have the critical minerals, chromium, lithium, copper, nickel, that are needed to drive the low carbon pathway. So SAT cooperation should be about exchanging knowledge on what is happening in other countries and other regions with the other regions, and also the discussion of electric mobility and e-mobility, so that at least we can have non-motorized transport. The continent having critical minerals should not only focus on exporting raw materials, could engage with China, that is already a leader in this, to add value to the critical minerals, so that at least opportunities can actually also be created in the economy, but don't do so in a sustainable way. The other aspect that I think is quite very, very important is that the monitoring of solutions across the world have not taken center stage. What has actually been out there and is rising is that we do monitor the state of our environment, and the monitoring of the solutions that need to match the challenges have not been at par. And so moving forward, we must be able to dictate slow onset events like the wastewater that I mentioned, that can actually be coming out of a factory or a manufacturing plant and leaching into our oceans. Because these are slow onset, we might not be able to dictate it until it's already gotten into a point that is destroying our biodiversity. The last aspect is finance. Like I mentioned, 50% of the entire global gross domestic product comes from nature, but it's done in an unsustainable way. But there needs to be incentives to then be able to drive sustainable approaches of nature-based action.
Yeah, what's your take on this, Mr. Dude?
I'd like to go back a little step. One of the things that I've come to understand is that we have on the world a lot of irrelevant people. They're irrelevant because they cannot produce anything. They're irrelevant because they cannot buy anything. So when you look at these people, you say they really have no value. That they have a soul, that they have a heart, that they have a body, that they have desires, that they have intelligence, don't count. They're irrelevant because they are not participating in my market economy. They don't add anything to my market economy. So that, I think, is a major problem that we have to find a way out of, a major solution.
The Global South, very quickly, Professor Liu, what's your take?
I think, we should share the kind of, good practices, regular basis, so that, all the people will be geared toward the same direction. Okay.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your input. And that's it for the special program focusing on the 6th UN Environment Assembly, One World Under One Sky. I'm Pan Dong with CGTN.
And of course, right here, we were joined by our guests on the extreme right, Richard Munang, Head of Global Environment Monitoring Systems. Thank you so much, Richard, for joining us. In the middle has been Fred Dubé, former Senior Counselor of the United Nations Secretariat and Expert Advisor for the international work of China, Biodiversity Conservation and Green Development. Thank you, Fred, for joining us. Last but not least, on my immediate right has been Professor Liu Peiming, Executive Vice President of Tongji University. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. My name is George Maringa with TV 47. It's a goodbye for now.